Hello, everyone. Welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain, and I am recording on Yom HaZikaron, Tafshin Pei Vav, Israel's Memorial Day, for those who have fallen in wars and for those who have been killed in terror attacks. And I want to lehakdish, I would like to set aside this shiur in memory of all of those people, and also for a refuah shlema, a full, complete as possible healing for those who have been injured during these several years of war in Israel. So today we're going to talk about kedusha. We're going to talk about holiness. The reason why I want to talk about holiness is because, number one, I think there's a lot in Kachim that gets translated outside of the Beit HaMikdash. And I think holiness is one of those concepts that lives in Kachim, of course, but it also bleeds out into other aspects of Jewish life. And we saw such an example actually in this week's daf, in Menachot daf Kuf Aleph Amud Bet, where what we saw is a minority opinion from Rabbi Shimon. Again, not the opinion that we accept la halakha, but a minority opinion that the way we know that we may not eat mixtures of cooked milk and meat, because after all, the psukim themselves only say lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo, you shall not cook a kid in its mother's meat. How do we know that we're not in its mother's milk, excuse me? How do we know that we're not even allowed to eat it once it's cooked? And Rabbi Shimon says it's from the term kedusha. Let's take a look. He says, Ki am kadosh ata laHashem Elokecha, in Devarim Yudalid, you are a consecrated or set aside nation to the Lord your God. Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo, you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And there's a pasuk elsewhere back in Sefer Shmot talking about not eating a treifa. It doesn't talk about cooking. Not eating a treifa, namely an animal that has a mortal wound, even if it was shechted, even if it was slaughtered. Va'anshe kodesh tihiyunli, you shall be a people that is consecrated, that is set aside. Uvasar basadeh treifa lo tochelu, and you shall not eat meat that is a treifa, torn meat. Malahalan asur ba'achila umutar b'hana'ah, just as in the case of the treifa, we're talking about only an isur achila, only a prohibition to eat. Afkan asur ba'achila umutar b'hana'ah. So too in the case of milk and meat, we're talking about not being allowed to eat it, but you still are allowed to gain benefit from it. Now, of course, what we see in this Gemara, this minority opinion, is something that is cited in the Tosefta. It's cited in the Tosefta in Orla, where Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Basar b'chalav is mutar b'hana'ah, is permitted to gain benefit from it, meaning you can give it away to somebody, you can make money off it, etc., etc. However, the mainline perspective, la halakha, is in the Mishnah in Chulin, Perek Chet, Besar behema tehora, bechalav behema tehora, asur levashel ve'asur b'hana'ah. A kosher animal's meat that has been cooked with a kosher animal's milk, you may not, or I should say, kosher animal's meat and kosher animal's milk, you may not cook them together, you may not gain benefit from that cooked mixture. That is the halakha. We also see in the Mechilta de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, also Tanaitic literature, also early rabbinic literature, Midrash Halakha, Ne'emar kan lo tevashel gedi. It is said here in Shemot what's being described. You shall not cook a kid, v'ne'emar l'halan. And it says in two other places, lo tevashel, lo tevashel. Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo is repeated 2 more times in the Torah. So it's 3 times that it says do not cook. Echad le'isur achilato, ve'echad le'isur hana'ato, ve'echad le'isur bishulo. So each one of those levativa shells is coming to give you a different prohibition. One, you can't eat them together. Another, you can't gain benefit from their mixture. And another, you may not cook them together. So clearly Rabbi Shimon is in the non-unanimous camp, right? He's in the minority camp and we don't follow it Halakha. But what I'm intrigued by is that Rabbi Shimon, when trying to figure out, how do I know that even I can't eat milk and meat together? How do I know that, given that the Torah, clearly he doesn't think the 3 times that it says Lo tefashel gdi b'chalev imo comes to tell you something about eating. But given that the Torah just talks about cooking, I know it because of kedusha, meaning the Torah says we should be kadosh and not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And the Torah says we should be kadosh and not eat a treifa. I think that there's something to be made here of the way that the concept of kedusha, which if you think about it, the concept of kedusha means consecrated, it means cordoned off, it means separate, right? The concept of kedusha, which I think is strongest in the Mikdash, because it is a place that is separated. It is a place that even has a makom that only one person can go once a year on Yom Kippur. It bleeds out into, first of all, the identity of the Jewish people as an Am Kadosh, right? As a holy nation. It represents God as something kadosh, God as something that is separate from the rest of creation in terms of ability, knowledge, etc. And even yeshut, even what it means for God to be an entity. And I think it bleeds out into the notion of limitation in general. That when we have a limitation like you cannot eat XYZ, that itself is a manifestation of the concept of kedusha, not necessarily something that is sanctified for something, right? The way the Beit HaMikdash is sanctified in a positive way, but sanctity in the meaning of there are boundaries and limitations. And just as in the Beit HaMikdash, I don't have ownership over something, there are spheres in life where I don't have complete access to things. So I don't have complete access to a basar b'chalav mixture. I'm not allowed to eat it. Now, I want to suggest in this shiur is that actually the shita, the perspective that suggests not only the halachic conclusion that not only may you not eat basar b'chalav, but you may not derive any benefit from it. I think that's an even stronger manifestation of this sense of kedusha, of something not belonging to me, right? In a way, there's it's in some other realm. I know that when we talk about the Beit HaMikdash, it's in some other realm because it belongs to God. And here we're talking about it's in some other realm because it's off limits. But they share a concept of limitation and they share a concept of non-ownership or limited ownership. So in order to understand this perspective of kind of isur hana'ah, not being permitted to gain benefit, derive benefit from something as a mirror image of kedusha, and maybe sort of if you think about like a family tree, the isurim go in one direction and the higher status of things go in another, but they both derive from a sense of kedusha. I want to actually look at the Gemara in Chulin, which is a good prep because God willing, we'll be starting Chulin soon. I want to look at the Gemara in Chulin and see the many different ways that Gemara tries to figure out that not only may you not eat basar b'chalav, but you may not derive hana'ah from it either. And you'll see kedusha is one of the ways that it's used. Unlike what Rabbi Shimon does here, the Gemara in Chulin early on, actually, in the sugya, uses kedusha to indicate dafka, lack of hana'ah also, which I think points to a degree of not even being able to own something. So first of all, it's important to note that the Gemara in Chulin and Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Bet starts with actually the reason why a person is not allowed to gain benefit from basar b'chalav is because it's an extension of not being allowed to eat. Okay, so it cites the pasuk in Devarim Yud Daled, lo tochal kol to'eva, right? It uses that pasuk and suggests, it's going to suggest that lo tochal lo kol to'eva, you shall not eat anything abhorrent, and it's going to understand from that, kol sheti'af tilach, anything that I have told you is off limits, you may not eat it. So deriving from that, that basar b'chalav is the same. Okay, so let's take a look at the Gemara in Chulin. Amar Rav Ashi, minayin lebasar b'chalav she'asur b'achila. How do I know that you can't eat basar b'chalav, not just that you can't cook it? Shenemar lo tochal lo kol toeva. That pasuk in Devarim, kol sheti'avti lach, everything that I have said is abhorrent for you, harehu beval tochal, you may not eat it. So once I told you you can't cook it, you should know based on this general klal, this general principle, that you cannot eat it either. Ve'ein li ba'achila, how do I know that not only, right, this only tells me I'm not allowed to eat it, bahana aminayin, how do I know that I also am not allowed to derive benefit from it? Kid Rabbi Abahu, as like Rabbi Abahu. To Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Abahu says in the name of Rabbi Elazar, and I just want to point out, this is a later interpretation. Rabbi Abahu is later, right? So if the Midrash Halakha told us already that lo tavashel gedi b'chali b'mo, the fact that it said 3 times lo tavashel gedi b'chali b'mo, one of those is to come make hanaa off limits. What we're seeing from Rabbi Abahu is an Amoraic perspective that's a little bit different. He says, Kol makom shenemar lo yochal lo tochal lo tochlu. Anywhere the Torah tells you don't eat, echad isra achila ba'echad isra hanaa b'mashma. It's both eating and deriving benefit. Wow. How do we know this? Ad shifrot lecha katuv, until scripture specifies to you that you are allowed to derive benefit. Kederech shperet lecha b'nevela lager b'netina v'lagoy b'mechira. The way that the Torah specifies to you, if there's a nevela, a non-shechted animal, you are allowed to derive benefit. Why? And I'm just looking above to a different pasuk in Devarim Yud Daled, lo techulu kol nevela, you can't eat any unslaughtered animal, you can give it to the resident alien who lives among you. Meaning you can give it to the non-Jewish monotheist who lives among you, right? That sounds like hana to me. V'achala, and they'll eat it. O machor lenochri, or you can sell it to a pagan, right? Again, you can get hana'ah from that. And then it goes on, Kiam kadosh atal Hashem elokecha lo tevashel gedi b'chalei bimo, because you are a holy nation, and we're going to get back to that part of the pasuk later. But the point is, here, the Torah said, lo tochlu, but you can give it to a resident alien, or you can sell it to a pagan. Why did it have to tell you that? Because stam, the statement of you shouldn't eat, generally, says Rabbi Abahu, also includes you shouldn't derive benefit, unless the Torah tells you otherwise. So this perspective on not deriving benefit actually, to me, has little to do with kedusha, meaning there's no mention of kedusha here. Here, deriving benefit is just an extension of not eating, meaning eating is a type of benefit. And certainly there are situations where not only are you not allowed to eat, but you're not allowed to benefit either. It's just an extension of that benefit. You would say achila, eating, is one type of benefit, right? Another explanation that the Gemara in Chulin gives is that it's derived from bishul, it's derived from not to cook, not in the way the Midrash Halakha said, but in comparison to if you decide to cook a Korban Pesach instead of roasting the Korban Pesach, that would be something that would be asur b'hana as well. So too, lo tevashel gedi b'chalei bimo. This bishul is also asur b'hana. But I'm going to skip it because I'm actually more interested in getting back to kedusha. Okay? Another explanation, right? So far we have 2 explanations for how we would know that basar b'chalav would be asur b'hana. One came in the Midrash Halakha, and is going to be repeated later in the Gemara in Chulin, which was, it says Lo Tavashel 3 times. So you learn something new from each of those times, including Isurana. That doesn't have anything to do with kedusha. A second is actually whenever we have an Isur Achila, right? If it says Lo Tochal, Lo Yochal, Lo Tochlu, right? That includes Hana. And as long as you can find a pasuk that tells you, right, that you're not allowed to eat, right? Kol to'eva, anything that God says is abhorrent, and we learn from that we include basar v'chalav, it means you also can't get benefit. So not deriving benefit is also part of not eating. But I'm more interested in getting back to kedusha. Now I want you to remember that Rabbi Shimon in our Gemara in Menachot explained that because the pasuk in Devarim Yudalid, pasuk of Aleph, because the pasuk talks about us as an Am Kadosh, and there it says, Lo tefashel gedi b'chalerima, don't cook milk and meat. And you have a different pasuk in Shemot Kaf Bet that talks about us as Anshe Kodesh. And there, the Torah says right after it, same pasuk, right after it, don't eat the treifa, but what you can do is you can give it to the dogs, meaning you can get hana from it, right? You can feed your dogs with it, right? What it shows you is just like the treifa, you are not allowed to eat, but you can get hana. So too, basar b'chalav, even though you can't eat it, you are allowed to get hana. But there's a different pasuk that also talks about limitation. And that pasuk that talks about limitation indicates an Isser Hana as well. And that pasuk is a pasuk in Devarim Perek Kaf Gimel, which discusses a kadesh or a kedusha. Now, what's a kadesh or a kedusha? It seems that it's somebody who is on retainer for prostitution. Why is it called kadesh or kedusha? Maybe because they're set aside for prostitution, or maybe because they were understood as like cult prostitutes, meaning they had something to do with the pagan cult, right? So the Torah says, Lo tiyeh kadesha mibnot Yisrael v'lo yeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. No prostitutes among Israel, right? So the Gemara in Chulin tells us, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the Rebbe b'hana minole, how does Rebbe know that you're not allowed to get hana'ah, you're not allowed to derive benefit from basar b'chalav? Nafkule mehacha. He learns it from here, unlike Rabbi Shimon, who's in our Gemara in Menachot this week. Ne'emar kan ki am kadosh atal Hashem. It is true that in context of talking about basar b'chalav, in Devarim Yudalid, we are called a holy nation, a set-aside nation. But also v'ne'emar lahalan, we also have a pasuk later in Devarim. V'lo yeh kadesh b'vnei Israel. You can't have a prostitute in Israel. Ma lahalan b'hana, afkan b'hana. Just as certainly when we're saying there's no prostitution in Israel, we're not talking about eating, we're talking about pleasure, benefit, no benefit. So too, no benefit here. Meaning the way that kedusha is used as affirmative, we are supposed to be kedoshim. And kedusha is used in the negative. You may not have a kadesh or kedusha, means it is completely off limits. This is completely not this isn't nuanced. It isn't a little yes, a little no. It's completely off limits. Now, there are other ways that the Gemara in Chulin also suggests to figure out how lo tefashel gedi b'chalevimo actually can refer to not having hana'ah. I don't want to go through them, but I have them in the source sheet. I definitely encourage you to take a look. But I want to keep going on kedusha for a minute. Because there's a piece that I specifically, and by the way, our opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the opinion from Rabbi Shimon, the minority opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that kedusha actually teaches you because he learns it from the pasuk with treifa, and he doesn't learn it from the pasuk with prostitution, that it only refers to eating. That's quoted here in the Gemara in Chulin too. It's almost like the argument is, when you talk about kedusha, does it have to mean that there's a full Isser Hana? Does it have to mean that it's totally off limits? Or when you talk about kedusha, and you use that terminology, does it even mean it's just partially not yours? But I want to stick to this kedusha and isur hana for a minute. Because within the sugya, and I ellipsized it, meaning I skipped over it because I want to look at it separately. The Gemara talks about the question of why everything that you're not allowed to eat should not necessarily also be asur b'hana, right? And the term kedusha is used there too, right? Because not everything you're not allowed to eat is asur b'hana. We already saw treifa is not asur b'hana, nevela is not asur b'hana. So look at the Gemara in Chulin in number 13. Kuf Yudal Amud Bet to Kuf Tet Vav Amud Aleph. Elameata, I would have thought, Maseh Shabbat Litzuru. Maybe if somebody violated Shabbat on purpose and cooked something, let's say, not only shouldn't they be allowed to eat it, but nobody should be allowed to eat it. Meaning there should even be, Rashi at least says this, there should even be an Isser Hana. You can't even give it to anybody else. Because this is an example of something that is toeva. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Ki kodesh lachem, Shabbos is kadosh for you. He kodesh ve'in ma'aseh kodesh. Shabbos itself is sacred, but the products of, let's say, bishul b'Shabbat are not sacred. Now, I want you to notice, sacred here means prohibited, off limits. That's what it means, right? So this is already, I think this might have been the first shiur that I gave for dinanddaf. Oh my gosh, it might have been the first shiur that I gave it for dinanddaf about what the halachic, there's a big machloket over what are the halachic consequences for an item itself if it was done through chilul Shabbat, right? Meaning if it was by accident, if it was on purpose, for the person who did it themselves, or for the person for other people, right? But here, at least according to Rashi, I should say, not even at least according to Rashi, here, saying Ein Maaseh HaKodesh, that Maaseh Shabbat, something that was done through Chilul Shabbat, is not considered Kodesh, and by that it means it's not considered off limits to everybody. That right there is literally pointing to the concept that kedusha as something that is sanctified because has some high degree of significance, distinction, relationship to God, like a Sefer Torah, etc., right? And kedusha in the sense of something totally off limits, not because it has some sort of higher degree of status, but actually because it's a problem that they are mirror images, and they're mirror images in the sense that they don't belong to you. There are limitations. They are off limits. In this case of Maaseh Shabbat, it's not just that it doesn't belong to the person themselves who made it. Nobody is allowed to eat from it, meaning it's completely off limits to the person themselves and to anybody else, right? Okay. There's one more thing that I want to sort of put in this pile that we're assembling, or this list that we're assembling of places where it seems that kedusha and limitation are being related to each other and are kind of mirror images, kedusha in a good way, and kedusha meaning off limits. So one, we said the minority opinion of Rabbi Shimon connecting kedusha of us being an am kadosh or anshe kodesh, right, to not eating a treifa, and us being an am kadosh to not even eating basar b'chalav, but then a more intensive level of the idea of us being an am kadosh and not even getting hana from basar b'chalav because it's really not ours. And the idea of not having a kadesh or a kadesha, no hana'ah, this whole concept is completely off limits. And now adding the idea that the Gemara, in dispelling the Havamina, dispelling the thought that you might think that something that is a Maaseh Shabbat that is done b'mezid should be forever off limits to everybody. And the Gemara here is saying, no, because it's not Kodesh. It's not Kodesh, so it's not off limits to everybody. One more to add to the list is if you look at the parallel to the Gemara in chulin, kuf yudalid to kuf tetzayin, basically, which is psachim kaf aleph to kaf dalid. When you look there, it gives you a discussion of where we get the concept of Isser Hana generally. And by generally, ultimately, we end up just talking about Chametz on Pesach and talking about a shor haniskal, an ox that's gored 3 times and has to be put to death. But how do you know that they both have an Isur Hana'ah? And the example that is given are pasuk after pasuk about things that were done wrong in the Beit HaMikdash or are leftovers of the Kodesh, like if you had chulin, mundane meat that was slaughtered in the Azara, or you have notar korban meat, you have extra korban, it has to be burnt. So too, there's a concept of Isur Hana'ah on these things. And it's learned through exegesis, it's learned through words, but conceptually, it's also telling you something that they have in common. And even the Gemara in Pesachim has a Havamina, has a thought, well, okay, so maybe everything that's Asur Bahana should be Bisreifa, is supposed to be burned, the way that things that end up related to the Mikdash that are Asur Bahana, because they're either notar, they're left over, or it was done, something was done wrong, like chulin slaughtered in the Azara, that those should be burned too, even the things that have nothing to do with the Mikdash. No, actually, because the Torah says in Vayikra, Perek Vav, Pasuk of Gimel, it's specifically Bakodesh, that if it was in the Kodesh, then Ba'esh Tisaref, it should be burnt, but not if it's something in the mundane world. But here again, Kiddusha, Kiddusha, Kiddusha. Now, I want to end by suggesting that one way for us to think about the relationship between this is, I've said, it's about ownership and what you own and what you don't own, right? It's the Mikdash is what God owns, right? And these kinds of off limits, Isurei Hana'ah, I don't know who owns them, but the point is you don't own them, right? Meaning you don't own the Mikdash because God owns it. You don't own the Torah because God owns it, right? Meaning, what do we, and we don't own Isurim because God said we don't own them, meaning it goes like that. I think it's interesting that there really are machlokot as to whether things that are asurim b'hana, and the fancy word I saw for this is usufruct. I don't know if I'm even pronouncing that right, but it's a great word. Do you own it or not? So I'll give you some examples where we see a suggestion that you don't own it. If it's asur b'hana, you really don't own it. So the Yerushalmi in Sukkah talks about the fact that it says "L'kachtem lachem b'yom harishon pri etz hadar," etc., that the Torah says on the first day of Sukkot you have to take the arba minim, the 4 species, but it says "L'kachtem lachem" to you. So Amar Rabbi Yossi says, this is the Yerushalmi in Sukkah, belulav katuv l'kachtem lachem. Regarding the lulav, it says you shall take for yourselves, meaning mishel lachem. It has to belong to you. Lo mishel isurei hanaya. You cannot take a lulav that is from among those things that may not be benefited from. Now, one example would be if you took a lulav from an Irani Tachat, a city that was supposed to be destroyed or was destroyed because of their idolatry, right? There are other rabbinic statements that says you can't use that because it's supposed to be burnt, so it's as though it's burnt, right? It's as though it doesn't exist. But here it's basically saying it's not yours. If it's an Isra or not, it's not yours. Shulchan Aruch, obviously many years later, centuries later, many centuries later, a millennium later plus. The Shulchan Aruch says, talking about, of course, you can't have a borrowed lulav on the first day, which is why if you don't own a lulav and somebody gives it to you on the first day, they are giving it to you as a gift because dibayinan lachem, we need it to be yours, right? And the Ramah says, if for some reason somebody was forsworn benefit from the lulav of their fellow person, omi lulavo shel atzmo, or their own lulav, eno yotzeh bo b'yom rishon. You can't actually do the mitzvah on the first day because it's not yours. On the first day, if you can't get hanah from something, it means it's not yours, right? I'll give you another example. The Gemara in Pesachim and Davav Amud talks about the importance of bitul chametz, that you should do bitul chametz. And the Gemara says, we want to do bitul chametz. Why? Because Dilma mishkachet lalabatar isura, maybe you're going to find, we want you to do bitul chametz early rather than if you just, find chametz on Pesach, right? Dilma mishkachet lalabatar isura, maybe you're going to find it once the Isser sets in, which according to Rabbi Yehuda is already midday on Erev Pesach, so we don't have to wait to Pesach to get to that. V'lav birshutei kaima, and at that point, it's not in your possession anymore. V'lo matzi mevatel, and you can't be mevatel it anymore. You can't nullify it anymore because it doesn't belong to you. Why doesn't it belong to you? Because at this point, not only you're not allowed to eat it, you're also not allowed to get hanah from it. You're not allowed to get benefit from it. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Shnei dvarim einan b'rshuto shel adam. There are two things that actually don't belong to a person. V'asana katuv ki b'rshuto, and the Torah makes it as though they're in their possession. Ve'elohein bor b'rshuta rabim. One example is if you make a pit in the public thoroughfare. Of course, it's in the public thoroughfare. It doesn't belong to you, but you are still responsible for the ramifications as though you owned it. And the chametz mishesh sha'ot v'mala, as well as chametz from 6 hours into the day, meaning midday on Erev Pesach, because it doesn't really belong to you because there's an Isser. Of course, there are other opinions that go in slightly different directions, but I did really want, as we're getting towards the end of Menachot and we're getting into Chulin, which is going to be, obviously about more day to day, I just want us to see how the concept of kedusha, it really permeates, it permeates Torah in many different disciplines and many different realms. Wishing you all a meaningful day. Thanks for learning with me.